if you have questions, if you even just want to share that, you've been involved in a case and it's been difficult, or you've been unsure as to what to do, or if you want to message Bree or I directly, that's okay too. Or use this opportunity to ask your questions, and we hope to get to answer all. And if for some reason we do need to provide some one-on-one support, that's okay too, right? That's part of why we do this training as well, so that folks know us as a resource, and the same for us to learn of those of you who are across the nation doing this work, and potentially coming in contact with survivors or individuals at risk. And so I want to get us moving for the sake of time, and I trust that my colleagues here will help me keep up, with time. But before we move forward, I recognize that a lot of us that do work with survivors, with individuals at risk, or folks who have faced gender-based violence, often, we ourselves may be survivors, or we may have experienced, trauma, and these type of trainings, as wonderful as they are, they may cause an emotional reaction. And so we hope and trust that you all will take good care of yourselves. If at any moment you do have to, step out, that's perfectly fine. And at the same time, I trust that you will assess if that discomfort is something that perhaps to sit with and to listen, if it's challenging an opinion or perhaps a thought that you may have about this issue. And so again, I trust that you will be able to best assess what you may need. And again, if speaking with one of us one-on-one is what would be most helpful, we are always happy to be of support, and we will have our contact information at the end. Again, thank you so much for being here. I'd like to start by sharing what you will be getting from today's webinar. And so we'll do a brief overview of Tahari services and then truly jump right into the issue. We will discuss our definition of forced marriage, what it is, what it isn't, and how it's different from the arranged marriage process, at least in our opinion. From there, we'll dive into how these types of tactics manifest, and especially in refugee communities. We'll move forward with better understanding how forced marriage does intersect with other forms of abuse, which is incredibly important, as usually the other forms of violence present first to service providers, and then we have to ask questions to uncover the forced marriage. We'll have a couple of brief case discussions to get us thinking about, common case scenarios and how we would respond. If time allows, we will have a short break, a short stretch break, and then dive into a brief portion on child marriage, and close out with what I think is the most important piece, which is screening and responding, and how we take a survivor-centered approach. And so I'll move us ahead to give a brief overview of the Tahari Justice Center, which is the organization that the Forced Marriage Initiative is part of. And so if you are unaware of our organization, we are a national nonprofit, and we provide free legal services to immigrants who have faced gender-based violence. And so that is Tahari's, bread and butter. We are working on cases of VAWA self-petitions, T visas, U visas, asylum cases, you name it. That is really what we do day in and day out. And we are very lucky to also have an interdisciplinary model where the folks who are receiving that legal support are also receiving or have the option to receive social services, with the hopes that folks are able to get both that legal and social services needs met. And so we have offices in California, in Texas, in Georgia, and in the Virginia, DC, Maryland area. Our project, the Forced Marriage Initiative, sits in the Virginia office. but our program is actually national. And so we provide services to folks all over the nation. And the biggest difference is that we actually are providing services to individuals who may not have or who do not have an immigration need, but are still facing this threat, meaning that immigration is not the main concern. And so how did our program come to be? Back in 2011, we noticed that we were getting calls from individuals who were contacting Tahare for we just had a good reputation of knowing about issues of gender-based violence, and we were getting calls from individuals who were facing this type of harm or who knew that forced marriage was something that was going to happen, but they actually were not needing immigration support. And so back then, we would refer individuals out, and little by little, we noticed that they were coming right back to us. And so that led us to conducting research, to conducting a national survey. And from there, our program was established so that we could and enhance folks' knowledge on this issue, as well as provide direct services, which I think is really the most important piece about our project is for you all to know that we do work with folks individually, right? We can be that advocate, that case manager, which for refugee resettlement providers can be really helpful to avoid potential, maybe a conflict of interest if you're serving the entire family, but someone does disclose and you're needing that person, or you're trying to get that person additional support. We can certainly be that additional team member to work with that individual at risk directly. And so that is a little bit about Tahare, a little bit about our program, and I'm just very excited to pass it to my colleague Bree to get us really diving into our presentation. So Bree, I'm going to pass it to you.
Thank you, Halitz. So hi guys, I'm Brianna. Yeah, so let's get started. So I think it's important for us to start off with the definitions of what forced marriage is and what it's not. So the definitions that you see on the screen are Tahire's working definition of what a forced marriage is and what it's not. The definitions that you see here are widely accepted and used throughout the field and the U.S. government. So we define forced marriage as a marriage where one or both people do not or cannot consent to the marriage. And this typically involves elements of force, fraud, or coercion. We do not equate the forced marriage to the arranged marriage process. An arranged marriage is one in which families may take the lead, but the ultimate choice to marry remains with that individual. So we understand that this is our working definition, and individuals with lived experiences may not describe or label their situation as a forced marriage. They may say it's a forced arranged marriage or something along those lines. So it's essential in our work when we're working with survivors to give them space to name their experience. And this offers a survivor led approach. So therefore, our job as service providers is to look out for key elements of that lack of consent. So moving on, when we talk about whether a marriage is forced or not, the key aspect we're describing and discussing is whether the parties have consented to the marriage. So consent is not just about the individual that they're marrying, but it also considers the timing or even the idea of getting married at all. Consent should be across the board. So it's yes, I want to get married. Yes, I want to get married to this person. And yes, I want to get married at this time. So in the past, we have had cases where clients did agree to the idea of an arranged marriage and maybe even the potential partner that was selected for them, but they were told that marriage could wait until after they finish their college education. However, at some point, the terms change and the client is still in high school, and now their parents are pressuring them to marry soon or even right after they graduate and to delay their college education or to miss out altogether. So, for this example, the person has agreed to every aspect of the marriage except for the timing. And because of that lack of consent for the timing portion, this element could shift it to a potential forced marriage situation. So, piggybacking off of the example, it's important to note that um, the process of moving from an arranged marriage to a forced marriage is not a linear process. This graphic was provided to us by Vidya Suri, who was a survivor advocate attending Harvard at the time, and Dirakshan Raja, who was at the Urban Institute at the time. This graphic helps us understand how an arranged marriage process can turn into a forced marriage. An arranged marriage and forced marriage, they exist on a spectrum where consent and the ability to ask questions or have preferences, to change their mind, or to reject the person or the proposal altogether are all critical factors. An arranged marriage may start with the individual having full participation in the process, but then over time, the family might disregard their preferences, disregard any concerns that they have about the potential person, and dismissing their options and thoughts altogether. So in that case, this would move the individual into a situation where they are facing a forced marriage. And it could start from stage one and then very quickly escalate to stage eight, or it can be in the stage six, seven, eight from the beginning. You
Thank
can
you
move on
so
to the
much,
next.
Bree.
Mhm.
Before we move forward, I'll just want us to pause for a quick second. You've done an excellent job in grounding us in our definitions and the work that we do. And I'll pause to see if folks have any reactions in the chat or if any questions come up. It's okay if there aren't any, but I will want to pause given that these slides really are the foundation to everything else that we're going to discuss. Okay. No, and seeing none, then I will assume that folks are just taking it all in. And again, remembering choice being key, regardless of at whatever stage, right? And so choice throughout the process is truly key. Let's continue. Thank you so much, Bree.
Yes, and thank you, Halitz. Um, so moving on to this next slide, discussing who is impacted. When the Forced Marriage Initiative, when it was coming into fruition as a program at Tahare, the organization needed data in order to understand who was impacted by this type of harm. So in 2011, Tahare conducted a national survey on forced marriage to expand our knowledge on the scope of the problem. The key findings that you see on this screen may challenge our assumptions and ideas one might have on who is a victim of forced marriage and what they typically look like. So, as you can see, the victims' families come from a variety of different countries. At least 56 countries were identified. The results different, background, faith. Some of the individuals didn't have a religious affiliation at all. And this is a very gender problem as well. So majority of the individuals that were identified were female and girls. And I also want to highlight that this happens to anybody regarding their, immigration status. So, U.S. citizens were identified, also people who had varying immigration status and ties to the United States or to other countries. And a lot of the times, the weddings occurred both in the United States and abroad. So, the Forced Marriage Initiative, while we mainly work with immigrant survivors who have stable immigration status to the United States, we do provide technical assistance to immigrant survivors themselves or to service providers working with immigrant um, survivors of forced marriages. Despite this being a gender issue, the FMI, we also work with individuals who have different gender identity. So this is not just, limited to women and girls. We work with all. We try to support where we can. Now that we went over the definitions of forced marriage and consent and who exactly is impacted, you might wonder, why do forced marriages exist in the first place? This next graphic provides a great overview of why forced marriage happens. And as you can see on the screen, the reasons are very complex and they vary depending on the individual's family. So not every case that we encounter is the same, even if they come from the same background, the same countries, the same religion. Our beliefs and traditions and societal norms all play a role in deciding what is tolerated within one family and what might be prohibited in another family. So we often get like, why would someone force an individual into a marriage? And that answer to that question is very complex, and the motivations depends on each case, and it's often quite numerous and intersectional as well. So to make a long story short, there's no one reason why, but what we try to do with this graphic is to illustrate how community level and societal level factors are present across all communities and all cultures, all communities, and how they are just some of the root causes of why forced marriage exists as a tool of power, control, and oppression, and then we relate the root causes to individual and family level triggers that might be the specific impetus for a forced marriage to occur. Persons with lived experiences, they face a broad range of coercive tactics. So as you can see from this slide, this is just a few of the many tactics an individual at risk can face. These tactics are often seen in casework that we do, and this might not be serious for some folks, but for the individuals themselves, this can affect their ability to decide on next action steps regarding their case. And some of the coercive tactics that I do want to highlight, the first one being is emotional blackmail. This is really heavy for a lot of the clients that we work with, feeling like you're responsible for hurting your family, or being told that you're ruining the family, that you're bringing shame and ruining the reputation of their family. You might even be ruining younger sisters or younger siblings' chance to marry. So, this type of emotional manipulation does take a toll on the individuals that we work with, their emotional and mental well being. I also want to highlight social ostracism. This is not just limited to the individual's family, but this also applies to the community as well. So, this could mean the person leaving behind everything that they know and grew up with. It may seem mild in some cases, but if you've never been allowed to make friends outside of your individual family or your individual community, leaving home and losing that sense of belonging is a very scary thought. I do want to shift to the other column and highlight physical violence and death threats. Um, This is not uncommon for individuals experiencing forced marriages to receive threats of physical violence or death threats. And this could apply to not only individuals in their house, but also to loved ones back home in their home country. So it's extremely difficult for survivors to carry that burden and that knowledge that if they choose not to cooperate or go along with their marriage, then someone that they love will be truly harmed. And this guilt can be really unbearable at times. And then lastly, I do want to highlight the immigration related threats. So this happens across the board, regardless of a person's immigration or their citizenship status. Often we see individuals are not in control of their identity documents, or they're not the ones making the decision to migrate to a new country. So survivors are often threatened with deportation, even if they're a U.S. citizen, in the for the flip side, U.S. citizens are also told that they're going to be sent back home to the home country or the parents' home country. Or this could affect like social services and benefits later down the line. So the list goes on for immigration related threats, and this could be very scary for some individuals, especially if they're unfamiliar with the immigration system in the United States and or that they don't completely understand how the process works. So these tactics can um, play these tactics can put an incredible amount of pressure on an individual and can compromise or eliminate their ability to say no to an unwanted marriage. So each person feels these impacts differently, and their individual reactions might vary. I do want to talk about case dynamics. So, there are a number of dynamics that are unique to forced marriages, and these challenges that may that may be different in forced marriage situations that advocates um, in their work with other people who experiencing harm, presents itself differently. So forced marriage cases, they often include multiple perpetrators who are taking action to ensure that the marriage goes forward, or to respond to a victim who refuses to get married. So this is not just an individual's immediate family, but it can also apply to their extended family as well, that they're facing pressures from and or threats from. The impact of the coercive tactics that has on a person and their ability to make decisions and to execute any course of action to keep them safe is a really difficult one. We often see survivors wanting to stay connected to their family. They just want the abuse to stop. However, sometimes the abuse can be so severe that the only option is for them to leave. So, starting that process to attempt to leave a forced marriage situation or a marriage that they've been forced into is a really big decision that does not come lightly for individual people. And the survivors have to consider a variety of different consequences that could happen if they decide to leave. So it's important to note that disclosure is not always does not always mean that they want to take action on their case right away. And sometimes it could mean that they just simply want somebody to disclose this information to share, or to brainstorm how to keep them safe if they choose to remain in their situation. So some things that I do want to highlight is decision paralysis and constrained sense of options. Each family's reaction to a survivor attempts to leave or to avoid a forced marriage can be different. So often we see that discussing the various options available to them and trying to anticipate what their family's reaction might be can be very overwhelming for a survivor. they have lots of different consequences to consider, like fear of the social ostracism, lack of community or financial support, especially if they're considering going to college, and how they're going to pay for college, and their educational goals, and fears for other family members in the house, not just the younger siblings, but also parents or like supportive individuals within their home. So all of this can lead to a survivor not wanting to decide and or having second thoughts on wanting to leave or not. I do want to highlight lack of knowledge. Some individuals do not know where to begin, and they don't know what resources are available to them, or they never had the opportunity to navigate life by themselves in general. So, a lot of the times, their agency is being taken away from them, and other family members are typically in control of daily tasks. So, like filing taxes, creating bank accounts, doing paperwork for school, or completing a FAFSA form or immigration paperwork. That's all done by another person. So having to decide or having to like figure out how to do all of that in combination with the harm that they're experiencing at home can be scary as well. Oh, sorry. I do have two more that I want to highlight. I want to highlight urgent facing travel as well. Forced marriages often have urgent travel component. Travel is not always internationally. This could happen domestically as well. So families are known to travel for the purposes of finding a spouse, confirming engagement, or to even have a wedding ceremony. And this often might speed up any unwanted timelines like sorry, this often speeds up the process of like unwanted behaviors, or if they're suspecting, the family suspecting that the individual is engaging in behavior that it's not appropriate for their family. And then lastly, I want to highlight the reluctant sponsor scenario. One dynamic that is pretty unique and common in the cases that we work with is completing documentation to sponsor a spouse to the United States. This documentation can be completed with or without the survivor's knowledge. We have several cases where a person who is at risk completes the sponsorship process either under duress, or they sign paperwork and they don't understand what they're signing. They don't understand the implications that could happen. And because of this, and wanting to make the application look good, individuals might be forced to travel either abroad or to another state to make the marriage seem real. And this could speed up, unwanted timelines like planning, getting the person pregnant, uh, speed up sharing a home with the individual that they were forced to marry, and even creating like a joint bank account for them. Um, Next, I'll pass it off to Halitz to explain more how everything that we just talked about relates to the refugee community.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bray. I think that's everything does relate. I really appreciate what you have shared and getting us thinking about the dynamics that we are often working with in the cases that we're supporting and those tactics that folks are facing, right? And so I think it's clear to everyone here that um, you know these cases at times can be very confusing, and they are not just confusing at times for service providers, for the individual at risk, directly at times for even community members. That line between is this an arranged process, if is this forced or not, and again highlighting the importance of that full and free consent, and regardless of if there is additional violence or other types of harm involved. Forced marriage by itself is an act of violence, right? And sometimes individuals at risk do not truly have choice. And I think that is incredibly important. And to make decisions and think about, disclosing, all of that is takes such a great toll, and does require a lot of rapport building and trust. And so I do want to flag for folks that when we're working with, the refugee communities, we really need to check our own assumptions about couples who arrive married, and especially those with children, and the circumstances under which, they were married in the first place do have to be explored. We can have a lot of assumptions as to why folks are behaving a certain way, and it's just incredibly important to challenge ourselves to ask questions and to not assume that folks are in relationships that occurred willingly. We do know that conflict and refugee contexts themselves increase women's risk of forced marriage, particularly those who are of younger ages. And again, those who have arrived married may not have done so with free consent or willingly participating in a process where they were truly aware of their rights, and where they had support from family or community members to leave an unwanted or an abusive marriage, right? Um, Alternatively, individuals can arrive unmarried and unknowingly walk into a situation where a marriage has been planned for them, maybe fairly immediately after arrival, or that they can face that threat much later on in the resettlement experience, oftentimes around the stages of adjusting to citizenship. And so sometimes folks may find themselves um, in a in such a tough situation, and are looking to reach out to someone, to confide in someone, and as Bree mentioned, that may not mean that it is to take some sort of action, but it could be to have some sort of thought partnership, right? And that is the moment that is truly incumbent upon us to provide resource information, referrals, to be aware of these warning signs or red flags, and for us to be educated on rights and resources and options so that we can be prepared. Okay. And so, forced marriage often does not exist in a silo. It truly exists in combination or in part and parcel to other forms of harm. But again, on its own, it is a form of violence. It is a form of violence impacting women, or those who are perceived to be women, uh, uh, drastically across the globe, and the United States is not an exception. When you have a woman or a girl who feels they have no real choice in deciding who they marry, they lose a great deal of power, of control over their own life, over decisions about their body, about education, about finances, about decisions that are happening now or decisions of the future, right? And so it truly is important that as service providers, we are able to recognize those dots, that we are able to to uh, place ourselves in a position where folks can, trust and ask us, the questions, and for us to be able to recognize again these potential warning signs and flags, right? If we are not asking, if we are not aware, then we are not providing truly holistic services, right? And we want to be able to uh, truly understand the historic, the related trauma to help individuals or to support individuals in truly identifying the opportunities for safety, opportunities for healing. And so, more often than not, as I mentioned, forced marriage is not happening by itself, which means it is not the only harm that a woman or girl is facing or has faced or will face in her lifetime. Likely, a woman forced to marry has experienced abuse or violence prior to the marriage as part of the efforts to get her to comply to the marriage, right? To get her to understand that the consequences for saying no are just too severe. And again, they truly do not have choice. We have the marriage itself, which I will continue to highlight is an act of violence on its own. It's by its very nature, there is great power imbalance where you have, a person who is entering into a relationship that by its very nature implies that there is a tremendous power imbalance, and tragically more often than not in that marriage, they will experience abuse from that spouse. Right. I really like this quote, which was provided to us by Debjani Roy from Manavi when they, did a report on forced marriage in Asian communities, because I do think it speaks true to my experience when I worked as a victim advocate for on the issue of domestic violence, right? And I'll read the quote and explain a bit more. It says advocates speak to many women who are facing domestic violence, abuse, and or sexual assault in their marriage. Only later in these conversations does it emerge that the conditions upon which they may have been married were under duress, pressure, and ultimately against their will. This quote was really impactful to be the first time I read it because I know in my work I never asked about the conditions upon um, someone's marriage. We did our intake, you were in front of me, and, I have the questions that I need to ask, and we move forward. But I never dug deeper to asking, well, how did this marriage come to be in the first place? And the more that I sit with that and I think about all the folks who I've worked with throughout the years, I know that. There have been cases hidden in my caseload that did not receive the true, holistic support because I did not ask deeper questions. And um, I'm hoping that as folks are listening to this webinar, you can think about how can we try to, avoid continuing that cycle, right? We know there are hidden cases across communities, and so how can we ensure that we are truly providing that holistic services and really uncovering the historic trauma versus assuming that we know why folks are, behaving or acting, a certain way. When it comes to, forced marriage, it is certainly um, uh, I would say in the majority of the cases that I have worked with, folks have flagged, child abuse. And what we know is that a substantial number of forced marriage, victims or individuals at risk are minors. A child or a teenager being forced into marriage by their family, they may be subjected to multiple coercive tactics. If those tactics are looked at or taken together, that may amount to meet definitions of child abuse. Often, children or young adults do not have additional evidence. They know that this is going to happen because this is just how marriages happen within their family. They may not have a wedding invitation. They may not have additional um, physical abuse may have not happened thus yet, but there could be other things that are happening. And again, it takes us really digging deeper and asking, right, is there neglect? Is there isolation? Are they being kept from school? Is there physical violence? Are they being threatened? And if so, again, all of those dynamics taken together that may lead to meet child abuse definitions. When it comes to rape and sexual assault, I think that is obvious for folks that if someone is entering into a relationship that by its very nature is non-consensual, then the acts that occur within that marriage are also non-consensual. And so when we talk about prevention, when we're able to work with someone, particularly someone who knows that a marriage is planned for them or coming down the line that they do not want, this is a very unique way of preventing rape or sexual assault that we know is going to happen because the likelihood that they will be able to avoid sexual intercourse with that forced spouse, it's truly just it's very low, unfortunately. And so when we are truly in a position of preventing a harm that we know will happen. Another aspect of rape and sexual assault that we have seen manifest in cases of forced marriage is families essentially um, uh, marrying their daughters or the women within the family to the perpetrator or to other members of the community to quote unquote hide or put a bow on a situation. And so it is not just a consequence of forced marriage, it can be a cause as well. And we have heard from several survivors who have shared that unfortunately has been part of their story or what led to them reaching out for help when their families learned of their sexual abuse. That was a trigger for the family to move forward with a forced marriage, which again brings me to the point of checking our own assumptions, right? We can have a lot of assumptions as to why someone may be hiding abuse that's happened to them. And for one particular family, they may get support. For someone else, it may not be that may not be the case. When it comes to domestic and family violence, I think that from everything we have shared, it's clear that the abuse, the coercion, the intimidation, the pressure, the isolation, the what happens against individuals at risk, often these dynamics are are indistinguishable from the forms of abuse, from the control, from the oppression that is utilized by perpetrators in domestic and family violence cases. And so often we are seeing these cases fit more uniquely into the domestic and family violence space, with again that major exception that there is a difference when someone is reaching out for support or potentially facing harm from a chosen partner. And in these cases, we're working with individuals who are facing harm often from their own families and the unwanted partner or the unwanted partner's family as well, right? And so it is a web of complex emotions and a web of perpetrators when you have your own family who you folks may want to keep a relationship with, folks may want to have a connection with, and at the same time, you are still wanting the abuse to stop or to prevent a marriage to move forward. Stalking is I I think a common harm that occurs, but often we're not, I think, labeling it as stalking in the way that it really should be. And often what we are seeing is families, family members, community members utilizing their close proximity to the individual at risk to let them know that they cannot escape, they cannot reach out for help. There's someone always with them. And so they're using that natural close proximity to report back to the abusive family members, or they themselves are the abusive family members. And so a simple example could be, you're, a girl and you're thinking about potentially speaking to your guidance counselor at school, but you walk to school with your brothers, you go to classes with your cousins, you have lunch with other community members. When you walk back home, you're walking back home with your brothers again. If you are called out of your class, family members will know, and then they will report back, right? So utilizing that close proximity, whether it be at school, at work, at church, at temple, you name it. And so it is, again, a very tough situation to try, or one, to recognize your situation as abusive, and then to figure out, well, how do you ask for help or support, even if when you meet with your caseworker or advocate, there's a family member always with you. So how could you actually ask for help when someone is always listening, reporting back, or potentially maybe even being used to translate? And so these next 2 points are, honestly, they are trainings, on their own, and we certainly can cover lots of more dynamics and case examples, and go into more detail when it comes to human trafficking and female genital mutilation and cutting. But at minimum, I want folks to know that not often, but sometimes forced marriage is a form of human trafficking. Often the dynamics that we are seeing, they do not equate or raise, I should say, to the level of the state or federal definitions on trafficking, but sometimes they can. And I hate to say that, or just leave it, in such a simple form, but that's just honestly, how it is. Often we are not seeing the exploitation or the gain as the primary motivator. And certainly there can be cases where we have bride prices. Often that monetary gain is not the motivator for the family. When we think back at that graphic that Bree showed, that the root causes and the family level triggers, often we are not seeing, again, the monetary gain as the trigger, or the motivator for the family. Now, some cases do have elements of trafficking, especially when we are identifying situations of servile marriage. And certainly, there are cases of child marriage that often meet state human trafficking definitions, and often where children are involved, it will meet those definitions. And so this is a mouthful. There's so much more that we can go into. A training in itself, we're happy to discuss further if needed, but certainly it would require a lot more time. Same for this piece regarding female genital mutilation and cutting. I just think it is incredibly important for folks, if you are working with individuals where this is still a common practice. It is important that you are aware that it can be something that occurs prior to a marriage, right? And so I'm just read the column here. FGMC can be a precursor to marriage, or a warning sign that a forced marriage may take place. It can be a factor in family and community decision making about acceptable marriage partners. Marriage may also trigger the risk of FGMC. The survivor may face ongoing pressure and abuse around FGMC throughout the course of marriage and childbirth. So highlighting here that this may not occur just once. And again, if you're flagging for FGMC, then you should be also flagging or asking questions in regards to forced marriage. Okay, I know that was a lot of information at once. I'm going to take a quick pause to see if there's anything in the chat, or if folks want to add anything more before we get into some case discussions. And thank you so much. I see uh, Farishta's comment, and I appreciate you for sharing. Yeah, thank you for um, uplifting a piece of your lived experience. And so I seeing no questions, I'm going to move us ahead to some case discussions. And I say typical in quotations because no case is ever the same, regardless if folks are of similar or same background. And that is incredibly important to keep in mind because again, every single family is different, and that is again part of us having to check our assumptions and continuing to ask questions respectfully, um, you know, across the cases that we are working on or with folks who we are, working with. And so let's move into a case scenario that is, I think, very common. And so you've been working closely with Nan for the last 2 years. She is highly motivated and goal oriented. She has excelled in school and recently obtained her license. You are both ecstatic and are now working on completing job applications. A few weeks later, you receive a call to provide a reference check and immediately call Nan to let her know of the employer's interest. To your surprise, Nan traveled with her parents for her engagement. When they return, you contact Nan to follow up on the job search. Nan informs you that she is no longer interested and won't be getting a job. You are shocked and ask her to meet you. Then she mentions that she has no longer has her license. I'm going to pause here and hoping for folks to share what are your initial reactions to what I just read. Yeah. Thank you. I'm seeing some red flags. Um, uh, Her documents are not in her care. Asking who does have her license and why the sudden lack of interest in the job search. Red flags of control. Rebecca, could you expand on that a little bit more? I'd love to see if we are thinking the same things. Mm, I see. This fits the definitions of what you had described, possible forced marriage. Red flag. And Rosa, I see you also saying red flags. What is the red flag for you all? What, or for you specifically? What's coming up? Devin, I think you're highlighting what I was thinking with this scenario, some serious disruption in the pattern of behavior. Mhm. Mm. Ray, thank you so much for adding. I'm going to read your comment here. It says, if I were her case, oh, I think it didn't come to all, Bree, so that would be helpful to share with
Oh,
all.
yes, sorry.
It says, if I were her caseworker, I would be concerned that she did not share her upcoming travel plans with me, especially if we have been working together so closely for 2 years to the point that we're looking for jobs. Right. Yes, controlling her license makes it harder for her to move freely. Mm. Um, mhm. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that drastic change, right? So being excited about getting a license, going through that process, completing those applications for work, and now a complete shutdown. Tada, I see you. ID documents are so important, especially as a youth applying for jobs and college applications. Red flags for control or abuse in the household. There's a shift in behavior here. I really appreciate all of you who've named the shift in behavior. I think the ID piece is incredibly important. I hope that was a good like warning sign for folks, and I'm so happy to see that yes, you guys got that warning sign. But that shift in behavior, right, is incredibly it's just different, right? You've been working with someone for 2 years. This is what often folks may be saying, the model, client, right? They are goal oriented, they're motivated, they are, you have your checklist of things you're working on, and they're tackling down that list. And so that drastic behavior change, even the piece on going on to travel and you are surprised, you had no idea, right? That should trigger something in you, right? And so what I like to expand on this one, as you're thinking about maybe cases you've worked on, or even thinking of this case example, is that sometimes when we are working with someone and they may be highly motivated, they may be goal oriented and excited, are we taking the time to ask if they're receiving support at home, right? Or are you noticing that folks are not so happy if they are getting their license or applying for jobs, right? This is one where I would say that family trigger perhaps is that growing independence, and the way that the family would quote unquote, bring that person back to the fold perhaps is through marriage, right? They are getting, too independent. They are now, able to potentially work and move around freely, right? And so again, thinking about um, how we're working with folks and how we're checking in to ensure that they are also receiving support at home, and if they're not, keeping up with those warning signs and ensuring that we are educated on what resources would be helpful. Is there anything else that anyone would like to share before I move forward? Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to move ahead to another very common um, scenario regarding I think mental health. And you've been working with Lila's family for the last 6 months. Her family tells you that she has always been difficult and that she has mental problems. Things seem to have gotten worse after her cousin's engagement. You learn that Lila is now also engaged. You congratulate her and notice that the family is thrilled, but Lila does not show any reaction. This isn't too surprising to you, as Lila has never been big on showing much emotion. A few weeks later, the family calls you frantically as Lila had to be taken to an inpatient mental health facility. What are folks' initial reaction to um, this piece on Lila's experience? Yeah, I see. Was the family laying the groundwork for us uh, to lead us to think that Lila had, again, those issues, right? Do we explore that? I am assuming you're bringing up, do we explore that further? How do we know that there's a true um, mental health diagnosis or whatever issue that the family is naming, right? What have we done to uncover that a little bit more? Asking if she feels safe. I'm seeing here. Okay, I would feel regretful that I assumed she was happy with her engagement and would want to circle back on how she's feeling if I were to be able to reconnect with her. Right. So checking a lot of our assumptions, right? And not just assuming that her lack of, showing emotion is just part of who she is versus seeing the connection there, the potential for more questions to be asked of, of Lila in a way that is um, giving her, actual space to perhaps be able to share more. Mhm. Yeah, I'm seeing Lila has been through psychological and emotional distress lately as a result of her engagement. I would be worried about Lila's lack of voice in the conversation and want to find a way to talk to her without the family present. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for flagging that. That is something that is incredibly important. Often when we're working with folks, there's this piece on, they're never alone. How can we have conversations with them? And again, it's so important for us to think about, well, how can we use our natural proximity to the family, right? Sometimes we are working with folks one-on-one, right? Are we helping them, learn the bus system? Are we driving them to appointments? Are we enrolling them in school? If so, are we ever in a position where we could have, one-on-one conversations to be able to provide that person with a safe space to discuss more or share, right? And that I think is incredibly important, and it is key, like for us, to find those opportunities and to you when we have them, to utilize them in a way that that allows for folks to be able to share more if they so choose. I see again that's asking, wanting to maybe speak alone. Mhm. Systems notice and right systems are not supportive of her voice, right? So I'm assuming that Nancy, you mean also in the way that the family describes her, right? That's also something for us to think about. And the family describes her as always having problems, and they are thrilled, she's not thrilled, or there's something there, right? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I see it, right. What was the basis for her family's decision to commit her? Mental health can often be used as an excuse to cover up abuse. Thank you for naming that is so true. I wonder if she has separate care or a therapist that she may trust, right? Um, is she depressed? Was there ever any one-on-one time with her? And thank you everyone for naming that. That for me is also incredibly important, right? Has there ever been one-on-one time? If not, how do we know? Like, how can we find that time to, if we're able to reconnect with Lila, to support her moving forward, right? Are we making assumptions as to why she's behaving in the way that, that she's behaving because of what the family, told us, and we're taking that at face value versus digging deeper, right? The family may just be sweeping, mental health under the rug, or utilizing that as, someone pointed in the chat, as a way to cover up abuse. Any final thoughts on this case, or just, the mental health component altogether? Seeing none, I will move us forward. And so, um, it's in the 5 years I've been with the Forced Marriage Initiative, I believe that if not all of my cases, the large majority have named, uh, the suicidal ideations or suicide attempts, just have been present in the cases that I have worked with. Forced marriage, this dynamic of forced marriage, mental health, yes, parents utilizing, mental health against individuals, but also folks truly needing that additional support. Again, this complex web of wanting abuse to stop, and at the same time it coming from your family, and feeling truly stuck in that, um uh the you know suicide uh does seem, as folks have named, as a true way of getting the abuse to stop. And often, sometimes that, as folks have shared with me, it's maybe the only way that, to get the abuse to stop, that doesn't shame my family, or I can't leave. If I leave home, that will be worse, right? There's just, if I report and my family's involved with the legal system, I will never be able to truly be part of my family, right? These are so issues that are so complex. And so I'm highlighting this piece here because in 2015, the World Health Organization did issue out a report which named the leading cause of death around the world for older adolescent girls and named suicide as that leading cause of death. And when they broke down those risk factors for suicide, forced marriage was a named risk factor. I know I've provided technical assistance on several cases that also involve these dynamics, and I just think it's incredibly important for us to name and to think about, the cases we're working on, those who we will serve in the future, and to remember to ask the right questions to again check our assumptions about individuals' mental health, about their behavior, and to ensure that we are conducting proper intake, and our response is also one that is supportive and providing referrals as early as possible, considering what we just went over. Any reactions here? Anyone surprised by this report? Well, seeing, um, yeah, again, unfortunately, not surprising. Yeah, it's not, and I think what's surprising is that we don't talk about it often in a connection to, mental health and suicide, and but it is very important, especially as we're thinking of we're providing services to individuals who have faced gender-based violence. Again, forced marriage is a form of violence that we also should be, screening for as well, right? It does not exist by itself. Often there are other types of harm or other symptoms that perhaps are coming to the light of service providers, and it is really important for us to spot those and again find those safe ways to be able to ask more questions, to not be accusatory, but really to find the moments to be able to give folks a safe space to perhaps share more. And so, for the sake of time, I have it's at the 15-minute mark. If we could maybe come back in 5 minutes, because we do have a lot more to cover. So just giving folks a quick 5 minute stretch break. So we'll be back at the 20-minute mark. And so I will hang tight for the next couple of minutes if folks want to ask any more questions or add more to the chat of what you've thought about, the webinar thus far. If there's any additional thoughts coming to mind. Otherwise, please, folks, take a quick 5 minute stretch, get your water, and we'll continue along. Nancy, thank you so much for raising. I want to read your comment so that it is saved for the recording, because it is a very important one. In cultures that value the collective over the individual, these kinds of situations are psychologically layered, and we need to dig deeper in trying to understand the thinking of the person who is being harmed. Getting away is not so simple aside from the age. And um, that is so true. And I thank you so much for naming.
Hi, everyone. If you can hear me, just letting you know we have about 2 minutes left. Hi, everyone. If you can hear me, we'll get started in just a few.
All right. Um, Love to make sure that folks are back. If you can maybe give me a quick hello in the chat, that way I know to get started. Thank you for that, and I appreciate folks' flexibility in having a little bit of a shorter break so we can continue. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for that. Okay, moving ahead. Um, I will talk a bit about child marriage in the US and our work on the issue of child marriage. And I'll start by sharing with folks that as we began the forced marriage initiative, we noticed that truly the most difficult cases were those that involved minors. Uh, the dynamics involving minors are can be uh, compounded by the rights that parents have over minors, the rights that parents have over moving around with their children, going out of the country, you name it. And so this really pushed our work into also focusing on increasing the minimum age of marriage when it comes to you know, to supporting individuals at risk. And so um, at Tahare, we do not equate child marriage with a forced marriage in every instance. We certainly can see a world where there could be two very mature, 17-year-olds, for example, who may want to marry. Um, and we know that we couldn't necessarily say that every single one of those cases is forced. But what we know, even with that information, is that the majority of cases are not these, romantic, loving stories that a lot of folks think about when um, when we're talking about this issue. Unfortunately, the data tells us the majority of cases that are involving folks marrying who are under the age of majority are have just lots of concerning factors. And so just to give folks an idea of what we've discovered between the years 2000 and 2018, we know of at least 300,000 minors being married. When that data was broken down, we learned that the vast majority of those cases or cases involve girls who are marrying adult men. And in many of those cases, those adults were decades and decades older. We also know that the marriage ages in some states are lower than the age of consent. So meaning in some states where girls were marrying before they legally could consent, right? So in places where perhaps we should have been looking at statutory, rape or other charges, we were seeing, marriage licenses being issued. And again, when you think about how parents are coercing or have the control over their children, this is incredibly concerning. There are some states that allow for marriages to occur with parental consent, and that unfortunately can be a way for parental coercion to continue. And so that is a very broad overview of the child marriage in the United States, but it is just incredibly important for folks to know that this is not an issue that only occurs in other parts of the globe. We have lots of work to be done here. We are very, thankful to be involved in the movement to increase to end the child marriage, to increase the minimum age of marriage when 18 no exceptions is not possible. And we are certainly so appreciative of all of the survivor advocates that also are heavily involved in this work across the nation. The good news is that since 2016, we have been involved, since we've been involved in the movement, we have seen laws be, strengthened, and we're very proud of those reforms, and we know there's still lots of work to be done, but thankful that, every year there's more and more progress, and we are very much appreciative of that progress. And so I'm seeing
Uh,
your question regarding what the colors on the map represent, and so I will go into that just in brief. In the green states, that tied age of marriage to the age of adulthood. So and there are some and green states still tied bears to, again, I said legal adulthood, so requiring someone to either turn 18 or to be legally emancipated prior to the marriage. And then we have some beige states, and I'm sorry, I know it's not a perfect image, but I'm happy to share with you like a one pager that goes into it in more detail. But the beige states, they passed a variety of more incremental reforms, so setting or raising age of of age floors, so limiting the age differences also of parties. And then we have gray and red states, and they haven't passed anything. And I have to double check to make sure that it is the most up-to-date graphic. It could be a little bit delayed, a little bit old based on a couple of changes in the last few months. But um, the gray and red states, they symbolize, states that haven't passed anything since 2016. There likely has been lots of attempts at introducing legislation, but that's how we've colored it or labeled it. And again, we do have a one pager that helps to better explain all of the colors. The gray states already have an age floor as well. That's an age floor of at least 16 years old. And then the red states, they allow younger minors to marry. And so we have, I believe, Hawaii and Kansas that have age floors of 15. And then we also have those exclamation marks, which are like to say maybe even some of the worst offenders. And these are states that have they're left without any minimum marriage age. And so, no, that was a lot at once, but again, happy to chat more about it. Happy to connect folks with our policy manager, Alex Goyette, who works more closely on the child marriage policy across the nation. And again, when we do send the recording and link the presentation to our website, I'll be sure to include our one pager and reports on the issue of child marriage, if that is helpful. Yeah. Well, it says, how is California yellow with an exclamation mark? There's lots of work to be done. Again, that is signaling that it is a state that's left without any minimum marriage age. And there was some legislation this last year, and we'll hopefully continue to work with survivor advocates in California and other folks to hopefully see some positive change. But there's still lots of work to be done. Yeah. So I know that's just that was a lot at once, but in a nutshell, when we're thinking about child marriage and when we're thinking about just this particular piece, right? In its most basic form, child marriage is just bad public policy, even in situations where those who are under the age of majority want to marry, who are not being forced. Again, we know from the data that whatever the girl's starting point, child marriage stacks the odds against her. It increases her inability and insecurity over time. And there's many reports and research that even shows that, girls who are not married, even if they are pregnant, do better than those who do marry at at early age, right? And so this is U.S. specific research, and again, another piece where we want folks to think and check your assumptions, because there are many situations that we have encountered where a girl is told she has to marry. This is you're pregnant, or your families are seeing marriage as the way to make the situation better for whatever the reason. And again, we are the data just does not show that it is truly in the girl's best interest, and or in the best interest of that unborn child. So you could be thinking, aren't there laws against this? Like what does that look like? And, in brief, there are no forced marriage specific criminal law. So there isn't, a federal law across the board that's that we can, point to. There are, federal laws do give you some avenues to share, rights-based education, potential avenues for support, but from consultation with survivors, with partners from many different cultural backgrounds, we are not certain that a federal, a criminal law will truly bring enough benefits. There are moments in this movement when we're looking for solutions where it may be like a given, or we may think, oh well, there has to be just criminal law against this. Well, what we know is often when there's criminalization, before additional support is given, or education, awareness, or civil remedies, that folks may honestly be deterred from disclosing. We've seen when the UK, when Australia, when they took a criminalizing first approach to this issue, advocates have recorded and have reported that folks have stopped coming forward. Why? Because again, these are complex issues that is not just as simple as get this person arrested. We're talking about people's parents. We're talking about aunts and uncles. We're talking about grandparents. Again, there's a web of folks who are essentially perpetrators, and at the same time, the most loved ones. And so, there are many cases where folks again do not want to cause additional harm, or feel like they are causing, I should clarify, feel like they are causing their families additional harm. On the flip side, I certainly have seen cases where those who have been forced to marry, who have been abused by the spouse, have wanted legal remedies against that abusive spouse, right? And now we're talking about domestic violence cases, utilizing protective orders, you name it, right? I certainly have seen survivors want more legal remedies against that abusive spouse. I'll flag here that when we look at our own immigration system, right now it is important to know that there is no minimum age of a foreign beneficiary of a spouse or fiance visa. You are supposed to technically be 18 to sponsor, meaning that the US citizens is technically supposed to be 18, but we have seen girls who are 12, 13 be brought over to the United States as fiancés or as spouses of US citizens that are way into their 30s or 50s. We are actively pursuing policy change on this matter, but again, another moment to highlight where there is still lots of work to be done right here in the United States. A win legally that I like to share is that in VAWA, in the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization of 2022, forced marriage was defined for the first time. It was defined as a crime that is intersecting with domestic violence and other forms of gender-based violence. And this, to us, is a very, very big deal. It's another way to share with folks that they are recognized, they are seen, and as more education happens in the field, we hope that folks are able to also see that they are able to use their funding to support survivors of forced marriage. Yeah. And so, Bree, I'm going to pause the chat and just let you move forward, given that we do have some really wonderful pieces to cover regarding screening and responding. So I'll pass it to you now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the leads. Yeah, so let's get into screening and responding. I want to start off with going over warning signs. And I want to highlight some common red flags that are often present in forced marriage cases. So it's important to note that one red flag alone is not indicative of a forced marriage threat. However, if several of these warning signs are present, then we encourage individuals to start asking questions. As you are trying to identify if a person is facing a forced marriage, it's important to check any assumptions that you might have and to not limit your increased awareness to certain communities or specific populations. So, if you're going to ask someone, make sure that you're looking at everyone, regardless of their background, and asking these questions. Uh, h- his, Going into family history, siblings. having an early history of being forced to marry or being married when they're a minor is a red flag, and not just for immediate family members, but also taking a look at what their extended family members are going through as well. Death of a parent is crucial at times. So we have seen when a parent is critically ill, this could be a trigger for a forced marriage to happen, with the intent to ensure that the child is being taken care of. On the other side, we've seen that a death of a supportive parent may also be a trigger for a forced marriage, as that person is no longer there to shield the individual from the pressures placed upon another parent or even community members or extended families. I want to highlight early, unwanted, and concealed pregnancy. So, when you come across an individual who is pregnant and they're trying to conceal it or they're openly uneasy about their pregnancy, we might have a lot of assumptions as to why they're trying to do that. But you want to further explore and get to the root causes of why. So some families, they might be angry at a child if they get pregnant. Or sometimes a family, they might respond a little bit more harshly if the individual is pregnant, especially if it's with a person outside of like the culture or it's not approved. This could be a trigger for a forced marriage. On the other side, we have seen that unwanted pregnancy could be the result of unwanted sex within the marriage with the person that they were forced to marry. You know, as with, someone with when they're facing an unwanted pregnancy with someone that they have chose to be with, it's really difficult and they could be dealing with a lot. So inside that marriage they might not have all of the avenues to seek support, when on top of that there are forced into a marriage. So again, it's just really important to understand why that person is uneasy about their pregnancy and try and get to the root causes and just be supportive as possible. I want to move on to the next slide. Uh, for warning signs, I want to cover law enforcement issues. Families that have a history of being reported to law enforcement, specifically for DV related situations, this could indicate that violence is present within the home, and that violence is used to enforce any decisions from parents or other authorities that make decisions for that family or that individual. We see that false reports happen a lot of the times, like we saw with the case scenario earlier. um, you know Families are really savvy. They know how to navigate certain systems and make the individual to look bad. So they can frame that potential victim as a perpetrator, have mental health problems, they're a drug user, frequent runaway, or they're a juvenile delinquent, in order to use law enforcement resources to return that individual, especially if that individual chose to take the courageous step and leave in order to protect themselves. I want to shift to education and employment. Fear of upcoming holidays is a very big indicator that a forced marriage might be present. We often get calls leading up to the major breaks. So think of winter break, spring break, and summer break. This could be the time that parents are thinking about moving forward with a marriage, and individuals who are at risk are realizing that their parents are moving forward, they're not stopping, and plans to travel abroad and hold a wedding will take place. I also want to highlight decline in behavior. Sorry, just real quick, decline in behavior and grades. As we mentioned a little bit earlier, that sudden shift in a person's overall performance in school or at work, it can be very concerning at times. This this type of harm impacts the individual's, mental health, and it takes a toll on them. Or on the other side, this could be a form of control from the parents or the family members to make them to quit school or not to go to work, and limits their sense of freedom and abilities and their agency. Yeah, so it's great that we have this knowledge of what a forced marriage is and how it presents itself in casework. So I think it's important that we discuss the approach that we take for individuals who are at risk for forced marriages. So our role in healing and preventing um, it's very crucial how we approach an individual who is at risk, and it's crucial that we approach in a validating and encouraging manner, because this could be really supportive and validating for a survivor versus creating a chilling effect and them not feeling supported and not wanting to reach out for help in the future. So I like to start off every conversation with, explaining my work, and, well, introducing myself, explaining my work, and for service providers like yourselves, also explaining any mandated reporting policies that you have so they can make the informed decision to share certain pieces of information about their situation. Um, it's also important to root ourselves in a non-judgmental way. A lot of our clients or the people experiencing this type of harm, they are facing not only harm at home and the potential for forced marriage, but they're also facing other types of isms. They might be facing the anti-immigrant sentiment or Islamophobia. So it's important to be non-judgmental. Some clients, they do need to hear that what is happening to them is very horrible and it should not be happening to them. But we want to frame it in a way that's not attacking their community, it's not attacking their culture, and that we understand that they can still have love for their community and their culture despite wanting this one piece to stop. And then it's important also to not gatekeep resources and knowledge when you're speaking with the survivor. Um, Sharing as much information and letting them know what their rights are. They have the right to say no to this marriage. It's not sanctioned among any religion, and providing, just resources to make them feel empowered to make decisions for themselves. You can always, reach out to Halit and I for additional resources or TA. And then, how to ask. Um, Many individuals that we work with, it's important that, when understanding that when you're speaking with a stranger, that they consider this a very private family member, and it might be difficult for them to share because they might feel like they're breaking confidence or trust with their family members. They might be worried how you might perceive them. Um, and they might fear consequences as well for sharing. Um, so coming with, an approach, maybe not saying outright, like, are you being forced to marry? But in, different contexts, it's not uncommon for individuals to ask about, a marriage, especially when like a coworker or a friend or family member gets married. You usually ask, like, how do you meet the person? So asking them, like, how do you feel about the choice in deciding who you will marry? How has marriage taken place in your family or your community in the past? How do you feel for that for yourself? How is your marriage partner being selected? Who is involved? And are you being pressured to marry someone who you do not want to marry? And are you sure about it? Oh, Halisa, I believe I passed this to you.
Thank you so much, Bree. And so, um, I just think it's so incredibly important to have some basic guidelines, right? There's so much more that we can say, but in thinking about asking, you know, often folks can get really in their head about, well, what do I say? And as Bree mentioned, asking questions when someone, a family member or colleague, gets engaged is often normal. We often ask, "Oh, you're engaged. How did your engagement come to be?" Right? Like how long have you known your partner, etc. Right? So those questions are not necessarily unusual for many of us to ask, and so thinking about again, those opportunities that you have with someone to be able to ask more, right? And thinking of the examples that we shared, they both involve, knowledge of an engagement, right? And again, how do we, explore if that's if there's more questions that we should ask, right? Understanding that one warning sign alone is not sufficient, right? But what is leading you to ask the question or ask more questions, right? What other things are you noticing, right? Is there abuse, a history of abuse? Is there a history of mental health, or someone, you're being told that there is, an issue going on, right? These flags will help you to then be able to ask more questions, right? And so the big one is to be curious and not accusatory, right? This is not about saying, oh, you're being forced to marry, you are you did this abuse, and then moving forward, and you're going to rescue the person. That likely is going to lead to a full shutdown, and not further knowledge sharing. And so that will unfortunately be more harmful, right? And so be curious, not accusatory. Think about finding those natural ways to have that one-on-one conversation, right? Do you, drive them somewhere? Do you ever take them to the store, or could you? Do they ever meet with you alone? Do you, take them, on a bus ride, or show them how to use public transportation? What are those natural ways that you already have at your disposal to be able to find a more comfortable place to be able to ask more questions, right? Um, Ask the individual what they think could be helpful. Don't, again, make assumptions. This one's a big one, but I would encourage folks to not engage others in the family or even your colleagues. Again, this is truly about respecting, the person. And so don't make assumptions that a colleague of a similar background or the same background or belief should intervene, or that it would be helpful, right? So really think about, what do you know about this situation? What permissions, what consent do you have from the individual, right? Is it that you should share with your supervisor and be that thought partner? Is it that you do need to ask maybe a bit more questions? We have seen cases where, unfortunately, we have had advocates who have not been supportive, who are of similar community, and the pressures on them were greater than their duty as a caseworker or advocate. And so, again, be mindful of the assumptions that you make, especially when you involve other individuals or share really breaking confidentiality. Very a big do not here is using family or community members as interpreters. I know that that can be incredibly tough, but especially when you're going to be asking questions about gender-based violence, it is so important to have neutral parties if at all possible. Not sharing information without consent. I don't share information even with my own colleagues without consent, or I present things in a hypothetical to get more assistance without disclosing. And acting as a mediator is another big no-no, unless that is what the person has named. It would be helpful, right? We have worked on cases where folks have said, my families respect, the pastor, my family respects an imam, or they respect this community member, and I think they could be helpful. But again, that is after we've done a lot more for relationship building, rapport building, to truly ask and know what that individual at risk thinks would be helpful. We don't just share or engage others without their permission and without knowing what really would be helpful. Now, referring to us, you could always do that. You could always share contact information with, if you don't have permission to share theirs with us, you can share ours with them, right? So there is a way for you to give more information and resources, or potentially partner together in making a call to us if we would be helpful. I mentioned that my working with minors, or cases where there are minors are incredibly tough, and so it is so important to be a space for folks of all ages to be able to share, but be honest about your reporting processes and mandates, right? If sharing more with you will lead to an investigation and you are not prepared to support that person throughout the entire process and to really tell them what will happen, please do refer, to us or give us or other youth service provider lines to that individual. If there is a minor who has disclosed, think about how you could communicate with them safely. If you're unsure, ask them, what will saying no to the marriage mean? What is their perception of the risk? That is incredibly important, right? Their perception really is everything that's coming from somewhere. So let's not be dismissive. And as always, providing that safe space to talk, a safe space to be able to share. I know that there are some organizations that do not allow, caseworkers in this space to, discuss, conversations one-on-one with minors. And so, is it that you could have a conversation and have, a supervisor if you think you've spotted some warning signs? Is it that that is where we could be of support and hold this piece regarding, the forced marriage potential while you service the, or serve, excuse me, the entire family, right? And so we are here to be of support and hopefully, um, you know uh, you know be able to support you as you work with the entire family, as we know that it can be somewhat of a conflict of interest to, you know help someone on with one thing, especially thinking about maybe leaving home and learning about abuse while you're still serving others in the household. And so we're happy to be of that support. And so, Bree, I'm going to pass it to you to take us home, and then we'll hang tight for more Q&A.
Okay, thank you. So going into survivor approach, so it's incredibly important when we're doing this work that we be survivor centered as possible. Survivors are facing different pressures from various different people. It can be from their family, their community members, school, their job. They could be questioning their beliefs. They have different life experience. So it's just important that we come to our work and our approach in an empathetic and survivor centered as possible. This decision to like either leave their family or to remain, whatever they decide, it's a difficult situation for them, and there's a lot of things that they need to consider. Um, you know, lacking in life experiences, despite navigating school or college, they might be lacking in other areas, like I mentioned before, like not having their own bank account or everything being tied to their parents. They can also be fearing for their siblings or family members and pets that could be potentially left behind, and just overall just worries about their future. So this is a lot to consider, as they're making decisions. So it's important just to remember that they're handling a lot right now, and it's okay for them to have second thoughts. It's okay to backtrack, as long as you're letting them know that you will be here throughout that process for them. It's extremely important in validating and reassuring for the individuals that we work with. And then, in order to have a survivor centered approach, I want to equip us with a survivor centered response. And moving on, as the Forced Marriage Initiative Project Associate, majority of my time consists of speaking with clients. So it's important for me to have language to respond as empathetically as possible. So I want to highlight this example of what a survivor center response looks like that has really helped me throughout my time on the FMI. So this response was crafted with the help of Nuv Baza, a trauma specialist at Loyola University. So you take a deep breath and calmly say, I can't imagine how difficult this must be for you. It took a lot of strength to open up about all of this. I am here to support you in whatever way you think is best. So far, who or what has helped you through this and or has been a source of support? I would like to share some resources with you that may also help and could provide you with more information on your options. Feel free to put reflections in the chat. How do you guys feel about this response? For me, I think this response really equips an individual with empathetic language. It validates their experiences and lets them know that, what they are experiencing is very isolating and scary, but also just acknowledging that something is happening with them. Sorry, just looking at the chat real quick before I move on. Yeah, okay. So someone says that they appreciate this response because they acknowledge a consent before sharing resources. Very empathetic response. True. And perhaps they can even say, is it okay if I share resources? And Nancy said, I appreciate all that and taking a deep breath first. Yes, acknowledging our own energy. Yeah, and then just lastly, I think Elise mentioned this, but just tapping into resources and connecting them. I think this will be a perfect opportunity to connect with local organizations as well. So you guys can all come together to support survivors and making sure that their needs are being met. Yeah, so I we can move on. So here's our website, preventforcedmarriage.org. We have a lot of different resources. We have webinars, we have reports, we have the forced marriage response toolkit. We do have survivor stories. And if you need help, there is a Get Help portal. And there's the opportunity for you to sign up on the forced marriage newsletter and to remain up to date to any program updates, any policy updates, survivor stories, just things that are happening in the forced marriage world. I find this website to be extremely helpful, especially when I first started at Tahare and at the Forced Marriage Initiative. It just really helped, ground me in my work. And our email is fmi@tahare.org, and that number is my direct line. It goes right to my office line.
Thank you so much, Bree, and thank you everyone for your time. I know that we are just or maybe right at time now, but we are happy to hang tight for a few more minutes if folks have additional questions or wonderful colleagues with LIRS would like to share more. I am really appreciative of this time, and thank you to everyone who contributed in the chat. Know that you will receive a link that will include a link to where we're putting the webinar, which will be on our website. I've made a note to ensure that we include the PDF. We'll include a tip sheet for refugee service providers, which we have already on our website. So you can take a look at that right under the resources tab. But we will also add a piece on child marriage, given all the questions that came up. So you have those resources as well. The phone number on the screen, that is actually Bree's direct line, and that email just goes to our team. So it's just myself, Bree, and our director. And so if you ever want to refer a case, you're more than welcome to share that information on our website. Again, I'll highlight there is a place where folks can self refer. If you don't have consent or permissions to refer, but you still want support, know that you can also contact us, and you don't have to share their name with us. You can, run the case with us, and we can be a thought partner. We're happy to do additional research and be of support. We manage, excuse me, I should say, facilitate the National Forced Marriage Working Group, which means we have some wonderful partners across the nation, shelter partners, culturally specific partners, religious specific partners, you name it. And so we are happy to be of support as well as connect folks to legal resources if that is what they need. And so please know that we're here to help and support. And again, we'll hang tight. If there are questions. Oh, I see my colleague Aileen. Thank you for being here. That's a wonderful social services manager from our Atlanta office. Okay. Brady, are you seeing any questions at all?
I don't see anything yet.
I just wanted to say thank you so much. It was a great opportunity for all of us. I think for the LRS network and other people who participated. I think it was, just comprehensive, and it came in time where, so really thank you for like making this happen. And it's been, we've been working for this for a long time. So it's very excited to see like it's been happen and we have it. But thank you again for everything and sharing the resources.
Well, thank you, and just for contacting us and helping us put this together. We hope that this is helpful, and if folks are reaching back out to you all, and there's maybe more where we could drill down on a specific area where folks are more interested, or perhaps more case scenarios or something else, we're happy to certainly do maybe another part two, or just keep going for folks to have this education, and again supporting all of those that you all are serving. So again, I'm really appreciative of the partnership, and please know that we're here to be of support. So I'll go off video. I'll still hang tight for like 1 more minute just in case, and then we will end the webinar.
Thank you again. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Of course, thank you. Okay. Well, thank you all so much. I'm just catching up on, on the chat. It's a little bit tough whenever you're, presenting. So I appreciate everything that's being said. I'll download it, and um, encourage folks whenever you do get the link, there should be a survey also, and that helps us to better our work. So if there's anything you really enjoyed or want more highlighted for the future, any tips, we're happy to get that. And so, well, I'm not seeing any questions. I know lots of folks probably have other meetings coming up, so I will stop sharing, and um, we'll this will conclude the webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you
Bye
again.
bye.
Bye.